Welcome to part 2 of the LX9 swap. We are ready to put the motor in and get everything hooked up, adapted, and ready to go. First, we're going to cover a couple things outside, one being the coil pack situation and then the AC bracket. I also took care of the crank trigger. We'll talk about that along with the rest of the belt drive once it's in the car. So I have the coil pack situation figured out. Here we go. So it's on there, bolted on. Here's part of the 3.5 ignition module with the rest of our stuff bolted onto it. Here's kind of what I did. First off, on the stock coil packs, I cut off both ears of where the normal bolts would be. They're just gonna get in the way. So I cut those off. Kind of used discretion. It went a little too far on this one. So there's it put back together. So you could probably come up a little higher. It won't be in the way, but leave yourself enough to bite onto with a bolt. That's all the modification with the 3.4 side of it. The 3.5, as you see, I cut off the top half of it. I use this as a point of reference. So right at the bottom is where I went straight across. Don't need that anymore. This is in the middle. You want to cut that off, get rid of that, and then this piece was up over here. So the way the angle is, it's not going to fit, and if you want to use this piece, take the one off your 3.4 because it's just bolted on with your upper intake manifold bolt. The first thing we have to do is drill pretty much 3 holes for the 3 bolts here that stick out the bottom. That way it'll sit flush onto that 3.5 piece. And then once you get those 3 relief holes cut, you move on to basically bolt this on to your manifold, kind of sit this down here and find a good place to where you can drill a hole and it'll go through both, and then throw some bolts in. Now the screws really don't matter, but so here's the 3 relief holes. And like I said, up here's where we drilled 2 holes through both, and then I just grabbed some bolts off the shelf that I have to use. Once you have that put together like that, come over here, slap her on, bolt her down, and you're ready to go. So the other part we're going to look at here real quick is the AC. So here I have a 3.4 AC compressor on, and I put the belt on to make sure everything's lined up, as I got it to where I believe it's supposed to sit. The 3.5 one is completely different, so you can't use that, so off with that completely. The spacer that comes with it is actually too small, so you're going to go ahead and just get rid of that also. What you're going to do is save the one from yours, which you see is a little too big. Basically what I found is this part right here on a 3.4 is more flush. They just brought it down a little bit. So the bottom doesn't need changed at all. It'll just be the spacer on top that we got to mess with. 1.3 inches. So compare that to our guy here. He's coming out to 1 point. He's like right at 1.5. I'm going to try to probably just grind it down. I'll keep measuring as we go and show you a final installed. So after some cutting and grinding, my best advice is mark off at about 1.4, because then by the time you factor in where your blade's cutting, it should get you close. And then I just kind of ground it down to take it even closer. Let me undo these bolts, slide this guy in, and I'll show you it bolted up. There is the 3.4 compressor bolted onto a 3.5. So all you're doing is modifying the 3.4 spacer to be a little shorter, so it makes up for that space. I should probably point out too that if you're going to go ahead and use the 3.5 delete pulley like we are, keep the 3.5 spacer. That delete pulley is going to be spaced to utilize this guy. Next item on the docket before we completely toss this in is the differential brackets. So your stock one won't work because the holes in the block are different on the 3.5. They're in a different spot. However, it's the same transmission basically in G6s, Malibus, whatever. So this bracket is actually from said cars. The lower one I compared is actually identical. And from what I'm reading, this should be what you need. So when you get your 3.5 motor, take the bigger diff bracket, the lower one will be the same. Before we throw this motor in, the first part of the wiring I suggest taking care of, so it's one less thing to worry about underneath. If you have a 99 to 02, you're going to have the oil level sensor in the oil pan. Your 3.5 is not going to have that. So what you're going to do there, cut it back wherever you please and just loop the wire to itself. That will just save from there ever being a light. So the motor's in. I want to point out that I'm not going to dwell on things too long, especially if it's just like basic putting a motor in kind of stuff. I have all the engine to trans bolts done. I'll stop at each like grouping of items and kind of go over it. And then obviously with 3.5 stuff, we'll stop and really talk about that. But as far as it being, you know, if you took it off, most of the stuff's going to go right back on the same way. I've got the diff bracket on, which I'm happy to report that it is in fact the one from a 3.5 equipped car. I was able to bring it in and drop it in straight most of the way. Then I took the jack and I put it underneath with a block of wood, and I actually lifted it right where the like nose of the transmission is. So, you know, on this side of the oil pan, and lifted the trans, and with this mount being off, it allows for the trans to tilt. So in doing that, it kind of helps make a little more space this way, because you're going to find you're going to run into a lot of space issues over here between that sensor bracket and having the harmonic balancer on. What you're going to run into on this side is, I guess for lack of better words, a little nub on the torque converter is what will get hung up. So once you get past that, it will almost just fall right in, and then, you know, with load still on the lift, start threading your bolts, make sure you don't cross thread them. And then before I took the pressure off completely, I had all the bolts loosely put in, make sure everything fit correctly, tighten everything down, and then I went ahead and dropped the lift and, you know, move it off to the side. So first thing, once you have this in, I suggest doing, you will already have your front and rear manifolds on. I would come back here, get your downpipe, pull it up, and the two nuts back on there, get that tightened down and taken care of. And come around here, drop your injector rail back down on here, and make sure this pipe is in place, ready to go for the heater core. Then go ahead and install that crossover pipe at that point. And at the same time, go ahead and knock out the front and rear heat shields. We're actually installing headers on this. That's why I kind of just point that out. So we're going to go ahead and get the headers installed now and move on. So our first stop or pause of installing, I have the headers installed, or if you're, in your case, manifolds, that would have been your first thing to tackle. Got our hoses on, I got our bypass tube on so far. I did drop the stock injectors back down, tighten those down into place. I made sure each injector sat down in place. I do want to point out real quick, after installing the motor and bolting it on, I went ahead and put the torque converter bolts back on. So that's behind the starter here. I just used a pry bar to spin the flywheel or flex plate. Something beyond that is I did not have the spark plug installed, so you're not fighting compression of the motor. So once I got the torque converter bolts installed, I went ahead and threw the starter on while I was down here and took care of the wiring under here, and I got our AC delete pulley installed. See our mounts back on. I already did new oil and filter before I installed it, so that's all good. Went ahead and made sure all our wiring is as tucked as I could possibly get it. So I did go ahead and move the ground wire. It is right here on the head already. And I made sure it's all out of the way of the headers. I do want to point out real quick, 99s actually had another ground that runs back here with this ground pack. As you can see, it runs up this way, right in with this guy. I went ahead and got the Casper fan relay system wired in already. If you run something like this, good luck. A lot of extra wiring. I kind of had to do a little extra to keep it tucked back. But fans are back in, that's all back together, and we're ready to move on from there. Holding the bracket back on, power steering pump in and tighten down, threw the tensioner on, and got our belt back on. So moving right along, I got all plugs in now. I got the front wires ready to go because we're actually going to run them underneath to kind of keep the top clean here. So now we're working on the top manifold. And before I take it back off here, so I have this bolt started. This intake is running into the problem that most see. So it's actually, the problem actually lies in this bracket right here. So I'm going to try undoing this, taking that off, and see if I can shave that down versus grinding the manifold. But one way or another, literally right here is where I got to make clearance to bring this, you know, this way more, because the rest of the bolts are not lined up. Before we grind into that, I want to talk about the injector rails. We got them back down and they're tightened on, ready to go. So before you bolt this down, unplug all your injectors and take this wiring, back it out, and run it underneath here like so. Keep it towards the front. It keeps our injector wires happy, so you're not stressing those out, and you're able to get your map sensor wire out the back still. Our coolant sensor wire is still going to run out this way. O1 plus, your cam sensor wire actually runs off this way too, so keep that happy where it wants to run. And then the main bulk of the wire tucked down behind the power steering pump and up and around. One wiring modification is your coolant sensor wiring, and the reason for that is because it's going to be in the back head now. It's going to be down back here. So what you're going to do, you're going to cut back some, and you're just going to add in probably 3 to 4 inches of wire just to be on the safe side, and then just turn around and run it down that way. Now, the previous owner here drilled and tapped in the factory location, so we don't have to do that. Your map sensor wire, what you're going to do there is cut there. When you cut the pigtail off the other motor, leave yourself, you know, quite a bit of wire, and then you're just going to match wire to wire and just attach that way. It actually sits right about here. No other modification. It reads the same. It's still a 1 bar, so it's just a matter of changing this out. I was able to cut down that bracket, whatever you want to call it, pinch thing. This guy right here that slides onto the fuel rail, took him off, and like literally, you know, fractions. That should help you avoid cutting into your manifold. Time to get that bolted on and wait for more parts. Okay, so we were at the final stages here, and I'm like 95% there. We're at the point where I can show you how to finish up this swap and get you guys going. So coil packs are in. I got all my plug wires on. As you can see, we have these Milzy adapters basically. So bolt the coil packs to that. Those bolted in manifold. Pretty easy. Go ahead and plug in your map sensor. If you had adapted for it, your plug would be sitting right here ready to go. I extended the wire about, I don't know, about 5-6 inches. So to utilize the stock map sensor, either way works. As far as throttle body, so we have a TCE1 that utilizes stock mounting holes. This is one of the Milzy adapters. So it bolts to the manifold, you bolt your throttle body to that, bolt your cable bracket back on. If you use an LX5, this part's going to be different, but all you're going to do is just notch out of the top, and the ball from our throttle will fall right in. Pair that with making a custom bracket. The LX5 one, when you get the throttle body and some cut and grinding, you can make it work. Whatever throttle body you have is going to depend on how you adapt. Wot-Tech also sells the adapter, so whichever way you choose to go. I'm Not sure about stock. I would assume with the accordion pipe that's here, it's rubber. It'll have some give to it. If you're running a cold air, you're gonna go to like you're gonna install it like you did before. Loosen your connections. You're gonna want to try to push it back a little bit to let it come around your battery. The 3.5 intake kind of points more towards the front than the 3.4, just by slightly. So if you're trying to take it straight, you're gonna run right into your battery. So just tweak that a little bit, not a big deal. Plug everything back in like usual. Vacuums, if you have an LX5, you're gonna have plenty of vacuums on your throttle body. If not, you're not gonna have any. Now this one was kind of custom drilled and tapped, which you can do, but these will usually come with a port right here on this end. I kind of like this idea where it's a vacuum manifold. One hose from the manifold goes into it, and you branch off where you need. So one's going to our map sensor, one's going to the fuel pressure regulator, and then you'll take one to your HVAC stuff. Now for the final piece for the swap, the crank trigger, which is way down there. So I may have done a little overkill, but I'd rather have too much than too little. So I extended the wire, which goes from your coil packs to the sensor down here. I added about 6 inches. Then I just tucked it against the firewall here, ran it with the cruise cable, and then just let it drop down here against the frame rail, and then just kind of secured it so it kind of stays against the frame rail, so it shouldn't go anywhere. Now I suggest waiting until you have the motor in to put your sensor in. That's going to make it a little difficult trying to get in there, but it saves the sensor from breaking. So get your sensor put in, take your feeler gauges or however you plan on measuring the gap. I've got this pretty much dead on at 0.030 inches. You know, closer the better, obviously. And then take your little bolt and secure it, plug her in, and you're good to go. Now all that leaves is fluids. So oil, get your fresh filter. Now you can fill your coolant once you get all your hoses back together and put on. And as long as you didn't mess with anything else, that's the only thing you'll have to worry about. And one last thing to mention, emissions stuff. So the first thing being PCV, you're gonna reuse the 3.5 one. So it'll go underneath this tab right here into the manifold, and then go into the front valve cover. 3.4 and 3.5 are actually the same. If you reuse the 3.5 valve covers, it'll actually be riveted in. So you can drill that out, you don't have to re-rivet it, but that's how you would change that guy out. For the Evap Solenoid, you're gonna use the 3.5 one, and it's the same plug that's on your harness. And then EGR, down here, you're gonna be able to reuse your 3.4 one. If you have a 99, you're just gonna have to grab a 2000 plus sensor. And don't quote me, but I believe the plug is the same between the two. If not, just run to the junkyard and grab a pigtail. That'll cover you guys for emissions. All right, so I think we have covered everything. Barring everything you put together correctly, it should fire up on a stock tune with no issue. It'll run on a stock tune, no issue. A lot of information, just like some others I've done. And I always feel like you're missing something, but I don't think we are. If you feel there's a gap somewhere, if I missed something, obviously let me know in the comments. I can address it. This helps you guys out, and pair this with the write-ups and whatever way you decide to go, whether it's a budget or if you get the Milzy kit to help out. I hate to do it to you guys, but we're gonna go ahead and wait and save the startup for another video that's gonna cover a bunch of other stuff we've been doing on the car and kind of just update where it stands. Look forward to that. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.